Welcome to the deep dive, where we take these complex, fascinating subjects and, well, we strip them down so you can walk away truly well-informed.
Exactly.
And today we are pulling the thread on an absolute giant of architecture, a man whose vision is so singular, so powerful, it basically defines an entire city, Antoni Gaudí y Cornet.
Mm-hmm.
We're not just here to talk about the, decades-long construction of the Sagrada Familia. We're talking about a geometric revolutionary, a fierce Catalan patriot, and an ascetic figure who took the wild complexity of nature and somehow translated it into stone.
And our mission today is to really synthesize all of that. We want to understand how Gaudí's personal passions, his Catholic faith, his deep, deep connection to nature, and his mastery of architecture all forged this style that is, completely unique, sui generis.
One of a kind.
Totally. We're going to explore the technical innovations, especially his use of physics, that let him just leapfrog the limitations of the Gothic style he so admired. We'll trace his life, from this fashionable young dandy to a near monastic hermit, and finally, his journey to global recognition and even potential sainthood.
And the sources for this are really extensive, right? They cover his whole life, from 1852 to his death in 1926.
They do. We have detailed biographical and architectural analyses that let us track his evolution.
What's amazing and what defines that sui generis style for me is his refusal to just stick to one thing. His buildings are this incredible intersection of high craft: stained glass, wrought ironwork, carpentry, and of course ceramics.
And he didn't just use them, he innovated how they were used. You cannot talk about Gaudí without mentioning trencadís.
Ah, yes, the broken tile mosaics.
Right, it's this technique of creating these vibrant mosaics by using essentially waste ceramic pieces, broken glass, discarded tiles. It's literally art born from industrial scrap.
That feels like such a perfect metaphor for the man himself. Beauty born from scrap. It almost hints at his later frugality.
It's one of the earliest signs that Gaudí saw possibility everywhere. He didn't see constraints. But it's also, I think, a philosophical statement. By taking industrial waste and combining it with this incredibly sophisticated geometry, he was maximizing efficiency and finding beauty in what everyone else threw away.
It wasn't just for looks.
No, not at all. It was an act of frugality and a deep, inherent respect for the physical world that, really defined his entire career.
Okay, let's unpack the man himself, because his character is just as complex as his buildings. We can start right at his birth, June 25, 1852, with this little controversy that followed him around.
The birthplace debate.
Exactly. Most official documents say he was born in Reus, a major Catalan city, but later in life he started insisting he was from Riudoms, his family's village nearby.
And this wasn't just a random memory slip. For most of his life, he was perfectly happy to put Reus on his documents. But around 1915, he starts listing Riudoms.
So what changed?
It seems to be linked to a rejection. He had submitted this huge proposal to restore a sanctuary in Reus, the Misericordia Sanctuary, and it was turned down flat.
Ah!
So it suggests that his pride was wounded, and he symbolically rewrote his own history. He severed ties with the city that rejected his vision. It just shows the intensity of the man.
He didn't just walk away from a project, he walked away from his own birthplace.
Wow.
That tells you everything.
And his family background is so critical to understanding his unique way of seeing things. He was the youngest of 5, and his father, Francesco di Isera, was a coppersmith.
And Gaudí himself said that his ability to see space, not in 2 dimensions, but in 3-dimensional volume, came directly from that lineage, from being the son, grandson, and great-grandson of coppersmiths.
How does being a coppersmith translate to architectural genius? That feels like a leap.
Oh, not at all. Think about the trade. A coppersmith doesn't work with flat right-angled beams. They're constantly shaping and hammering 3-dimensional curved space out of flat metal.
Okay, I see. They have this intrinsic understanding of volume, of curvature, of the strength needed to make a complex vessel hold itself up. He inherited a mindset that favored curves over right angles. It was this inherited spatial intuition.
He also dealt with some pretty significant physical challenges, right, from a young age.
He did. He had poor health, including rheumatism, which kept him pretty inactive. He had to travel by donkey cart or carriage, and that really contributed to his reserved, reticent character.
And that led to some incredibly strict personal habits later on.
Very strict. He became a vegetarian, influenced by the hygienist theories of Sebastian Niep. But true to form, he took it to an extreme. His religious faith, which was already intense, combined with this diet, and he started undertaking these incredibly severe fasts.
Not just skipping a meal, then.
No, these were life-threatening. In 1894, he fasted so extremely that he developed a severe life-threatening illness. It just underlines the intensity he brought to everything. Faith, diet, the structure of a column. There were absolutely no half measures with Gaudí.
And before he became this ascetic figure, he was a student working as a draftsman to pay for his studies at the Barcelona Higher School of Architecture. He graduated in 1878.
And his military service was mostly on sick leave, which ironically let him continue his studies during the Third Carlist War. His academic record was apparently just average. He even failed a few courses.
But upon his graduation, the school's director, Elise Rogent, said something that has to be one of the most famous appraisals in architectural history.
It's perfect, isn't it? He said, "We have given this academic title either to a fool or a genius. Time will show."
I mean, that just sets the stage perfectly for a career that was clearly outside the bounds from the very, very start.
It does.
And time certainly did show which category he fell into. What's so captivating, though, is the sheer transformation of his personal life. You have the young Gaudí, the dandy.
Absolutely. The young Gaudí was a product of the wealthy Barcelona bourgeoisie. He dressed in these costly, fashionable suits, he was regular at the opera, and he'd arrive at his early construction sites, like Casa Vicens, in a horse-drawn carriage. The picture of success.
Now contrast that with the older Gaudí, the one who dedicated his life to the Sagrada Família.
The contrast could not be more stark. He became incredibly frugal, wearing old, worn-out suits. He neglected his appearance so much that he was often mistaken for a beggar, which, tragically, has consequences later.
And he remained completely devoted to his profession, right, to the exclusion of almost everything else.
Everything else. He remained single his whole life. Sources say he was attracted to one woman, a teacher named Josefa Moret, but it was unreciprocated.
And that rejection seems to have just pushed him further into his work and his faith.
It really seems to have solidified his path. He took refuge in his Catholic faith, which just intensified over the years. That's what earned him the nickname God's Architect. When his friends and patrons started to die, leaving him more isolated, he famously said, "Now I can dedicate myself entirely to the church."
But to pursue that vision, he needed support. You really can't talk about Gaudí's career without talking about his patron, Park Güell.
Güell was the catalyst, a wealthy industrialist who saw Gaudí's genius early on, captivated by a simple showcase at the 1878 Paris World's Fair. And Güell didn't just commission one building. He was Gaudí's main financial shield.
So we're talking about Park Güell, Pala Güell.
The Güell wine cellars, the pavilions, the crypt of the church at Colonia Güell. Güell's patronage gave Gaudí the freedom and the financial security he needed to pursue his most radical experiments without worrying about commercial viability.
And he wasn't working alone. When you look at the detail in his work, it's clear he was like the conductor of a massive artistic orchestra.
Absolutely. He had this extensive network of collaborators. Other architects like José Maria Jujol and Francesc Berenguer, but also sculptors, ceramicists, ironworkers. This integration of the applied arts into the structure itself is a hallmark of his style. The building wasn't decorated after it was built. The decoration was the structure.
So we've established his intensity in faith and diet. Now let's turn to his public identity, where he brought that same level of absolute commitment. His identity as a Catalan patriot.
This is a perfect transition because the intensity was consistent. He was a huge figure in the Renaissance of the Catalan Renaissance. It was this cultural movement to restore the dignity of the Catalan language and arts.
But it's important to clarify, this was cultural, not really political activism, wasn't it?
That's right. He turned down suggestions to run for deputy. His commitment was to cultural preservation. But that commitment became fiercely public and defiant when the language itself was threatened.
And the centerpiece of this was his absolute devotion to speaking Catalan. We have these incredible anecdotes.
They're fantastic. When King Alfonso III visited the Sagrada Família, Gaudí spoke to him only in Catalan.
To the king.
To the king. But the best story involves the prime minister, Antonio Maura. When Maura visited, Gaudí flatly refused to speak Spanish. Maura, who was from Mallorca and spoke Catalan, had to break official protocol and respond in Catalan right there in front of the king.
That is just astonishing. How did he get away with that? A man so dependent on these wealthy patrons.
I think his sheer unassailable talent gave him a kind of shield. By the 1900s, he was a titan. People sought him out, and he leveraged that status to enforce his cultural principles.
But this defiance wasn't always tolerated, especially as politics got more tense in the 1920s.
No, it wasn't. In 1920, he was beaten by police during a riot. But the most dramatic incident was in 1924, on the National Day of Catalonia, during a demonstration against a language ban imposed by the dictator Primo de Rivera.
He was beaten and arrested by the civil guard for speaking Catalan. He was actually jailed.
He was. And even during his arrest in the police station, he refused to speak Spanish. His statement after paying the 50 pesetas bail just sums it all up. My profession obliges me to pay my taxes, and I pay them, but not to stop speaking my own language.
Wow. And you see this cultural symbolism physically embedded in his works.
Everywhere. His buildings became these manifestos of the Renaissance. You see the Catalan coat of arms at Park Güell and Park Güell. The dragon, which is linked to Catalonia's patron saint, St. George, is a recurring symbol. And most movingly, you have the Lord's Prayer inscribed in Catalan on the great doors of the Sagrada Família.
So we had this complex, uncompromising man. But his style, his architectural language, didn't just appear fully formed, it went through a clear evolution.
Correct. His early career was this deep dive into historical structures. He was really inspired by theorists like Ruskin, and especially by Oriental arts, India, Persia, Japan, and most critically, the Islamic architecture of Moorish Spain.
What were the key Orientalist features we see in his early work?
You see this abundant use of ceramic tile, echoing Mudejar art. You see Moorish arches, exposed brick columns, and these pinnacles shaped like exotic domes or pavilions. He was clearly studying texts on the Alhambra. You see it all over Casa Batlló.
The alternating stone and tile.
Right, with the tiles imitating yellow flowers. Yeah. And the smoking room inside is a direct homage to the general life in Granada. He was absorbing this idea of spatial uncertainty, spaces that flow and reveal themselves dynamically, rather than being rigid boxes.
And as he moves on, he has to grapple with the dominant trend of the time, which was Gothic revival.
Right, influenced by Eugene Viollet-le-Duc. You can see him engaging with it in the Teresian College and the Episcopal Palace in Astorga. But this engagement led directly to his greatest breakthrough, his absolute critique of the Gothic style.
He called it imperfect and only half resolved.
And famously, a defective body held up on crutches.
Such a powerful image.
It is, because it gets to the root of the problem. Gothic stability relied on external flying buttresses to counteract the thrust of the ceilings. Gaudí saw this as a fundamental weakness. He believed a structure should be able to support itself entirely through pure compression, without needing crutches.
And that critique fueled his obsession with finding a new architectural language in nature.
Exactly. It led him right into Catalan modernism, which was at its height. This movement was all about an anti-classical language, organic lines, a strong connection to applied arts, and a use of new materials. It was very ornamental.
But Gaudí eventually went beyond just the ornamental aspect of modernism.
He transcended it. He didn't want his buildings to just look like nature. He wanted them to perform like nature. His designs came directly from what he saw in his explorations. The caves of Majorca, the structure of bones, the trunks of trees.
And he famously didn't draw detailed plans.
Rarely. He preferred to create three-dimensional scale models and just mold the details as he went. For him, architecture was this total design where every single element, from a column to a door handle, had to be harmoniously integrated. Nature was his design manual because its structures are always perfectly efficient. Maximum strength, minimum material.
Which brings us to the core of his technical genius. He didn't just imitate nature's look, he analyzed its structure and translated it into mathematically precise ruled geometrical forms.
This is the bedrock. He used 4 primary ruled surfaces. The hyperbolic paraboloid, the helicoid, and the cone.
Okay, for those of us who aren't architects, can you break those down? Give us a visual.
Of course. A hyperbolic paraboloid is the shape of a saddle or a Pringles chip. It curves up in one direction and down in the other, which makes it incredibly rigid. A hyperboloid is like an hourglass, perfect for creating openings in vaults. And the helicoid is a spiral, like a staircase or DNA.
And he found these shapes everywhere in nature.
Everywhere. In reeds, in bones. His famous quote sums it all up. No better structure exists than the trunk of a tree or a human skeleton. He realized these geometric forms were so inherently beautiful and functional that you didn't need to add decoration. The structure was the decoration.
And this leads directly to his single most important engineering principle, the catenary arch.
The game changer. Now, the catenary curve is the shape a hanging chain makes under its own weight. It had been used for suspension bridges, but Gaudí was the first to flip it upside down and use it for load-bearing architecture.
What's the advantage?
It's pure physics. Because the curve is generated by gravity, the weight is distributed perfectly down the arch. The internal forces are purely compressive. There's no lateral force trying to push the walls out.
So no more buttresses.
No more crutches. That's the genius of it. And it completely redefines the wall. If your columns and arches handle all the load through compression, the walls become non-load bearing. They can be thin, fluid, full of light. He basically divorced stability from mass.
And he tied this insight to his construction techniques, making it affordable.
Exactly. He used the traditional Catalan vault-laying bricks flat in layers to build these geometric forms. He used cheap materials like brick, knowing that the geometry itself would provide all the strength needed. It was efficiency through intelligent design.
Which brings us to the most incredible part of his process. How did he calculate the precise shape of these complex structures without computers?
He used gravity itself as his computer.
The upside-down model.
The revolutionary gravitational hanging scale model. For the Church of the Colonia Güell, he built this massive 1.0 scale model, about 4 meters high, inside a shed.
Just describe the setup. It's astounding.
He drew the floor plan on a board on the ceiling. Then he hung strings from all the points where the columns would be. And to simulate the weight of the stone vaults and roof, he attached little bags of birdshot to the strings.
So the strings, under the weight of the birdshot, just naturally formed the perfect compression-only shape.
Precisely. The downward curving catenary shapes were dictated purely by physics. No calculus needed. He would then photograph this upside-down model, flip the photo over, and there it was. The exact, structurally perfect shape for the columns and arches of the final building.
That is just. The elegance of that solution is mind-blowing. Using 19th century materials to solve 20th century structural problems?
It's the ultimate expression of his respect for nature's logic. If the strings held, the stone structure would hold.
And all of this, the ruled surfaces, the catenary, the modeling, it all culminates in his life's work, the Sagrada Familia.
He poured everything he had learned into that building. He conceived the interior not just as a cathedral, but as a stone forest. The columns are inclined to resist pressure, and they have this double-turn helicoidal shape, like branching tree trunks.
So that twisting shape isn't just aesthetic.
Not at all. It transfers the load down the column in a way that minimizes shear force and maximizes compression. As the columns rise, they branch out, creating this fractal, self-supporting structure that distributes the massive weight of the roof. His goal was fulfilled. No external buttresses needed.
And this structural logic allowed him to completely change the quality of light inside.
Yes, this is where his hyperboloid vaults perfect the Gothic ideal. In a traditional Gothic cathedral, you have a heavy keystone at the center of the vault. But with Gaudí's hyperboloids, the center can have a hole, letting natural light stream in from the roof.
Creating the impression of a starry sky.
Exactly. Light filtering through a forest canopy. He studied how Mediterranean light hits at a 45-degree angle and used colored glass and skylights to ensure a uniform distribution of light so the lower floors aren't lost in shadow.
So now that we have the vocabulary, let's just do a quick run-through of the masterworks. Starting right after graduation, 1878, the lampposts for Plaça Reial.
A beautiful start. Cast iron, decorated with the caduceus of Mercury, the symbol of commerce. A perfect fit for Barcelona.
Then his Orientalist phase kicks off with Casa Batlló's 1883.
A pivotal work. That Moorish influence, the use of stone and those yellow flower tiles, and one of his first big uses of trencadís. It was his testing ground.
Next, the first big Güell commission, Park Güell.
This is where his confidence just explodes, that monumental parabolic arch at the entrance. But the roof is the big innovation here. The chimneys are no longer just utilitarian, they're sculptures, faced in colored tiles, a prelude to La Pedrera.
And the Teresian College, his neo-Gothic work. Austere, but structurally crucial.
Incredibly crucial. The commission wanted austerity, so he used exposed brick. But look at the corridors. They're supported by this elegant series of catenary arches. Simple, unadorned. It's his first real test run for the structural principle that would define his entire career.
Okay, by the early 20th century, he's in his full naturalist phase. Let's talk about Casa Batlló.
The House of the Dragon. The facade is pure organic movement. Bone-shaped columns, balconies that look like masks, and that roof that looks like a dragon's back. And inside, he used color gradation in the atrium to distribute light evenly. Just genius.
But the peak of his residential work is probably Casa Batlló, La Pedrera, the quarry.
Monumental and revolutionary. That undulating stone facade that looks like a cliff face. But structurally, it was one of the first residential buildings to get rid of load-bearing walls,
Right, it had an internal support structure of columns and arches.
which meant the layout of the apartments was completely flexible. You could move the walls around. It anticipated open-plan living by half a century.
Hmm.
And the attic is just this breathtaking series of 270 catenary arches supporting that famous rooftop.
With the sculptural chimneys that look like medieval helmets.
Exactly. Sentinels guarding the city.
And we have to mention his unrealized vision for a skyscraper in New York, the hotel attraction.
It just shows the scale of his thinking. 360 meters high, taller than the Empire State Building would eventually be. A parabolic tower topped with a giant star. It proves he wasn't just a regional figure, he was thinking on a global, visionary scale.
Which brings us to the work that consumed the last decade of his life, the Sagrada Familia. He called it the Cathedral of the Poor.
It became his solitary focus. He took over the project in 1883 and completely redesigned it. His plan is this enormous cruciform structure with a forest of columns and 18 symbolic towers.
The towers are a lesson in theology themselves.
They are 12 for the apostles, 4 for the evangelists, 1 for the Virgin Mary, and the central crowning tower for Jesus, planned to reach over 170 meters. Deep symbolism built right into the geometry.
And in his lifetime, how much did he actually get to see built?
Tragically, just a fraction. The crypt, the apse, and the nativity facade. After 1915, he gave up all other work and basically lived on site, pouring everything into that building.
And construction is still ongoing today, with a projected completion date of 2026, the centenary of his death, a 150-year project.
A true test of an enduring vision.
And the circumstances of his death are just so heartbreakingly ironic.
They are. June 7, 1926. He was taking his daily walk to church for prayer. While crossing the street, he was struck by a tram and lost consciousness.
And because of his neglected appearance, his old clothes, people thought he was a beggar.
Exactly. Taxi drivers refused to take him to a better hospital. He didn't get proper care. He was eventually taken to a hospital for the poor.
So the man who built modern Barcelona died because the city failed to recognize him.
It wasn't until the next day that the chaplain of the Sagrada Familia recognized him, but by then it was too late. He died 3 days later.
He's buried in the crypt of the Sagrada Familia. The inscription on his gravestone ends with, "Await the resurrection of the dead." So powerful.
Unfortunately, after he died, his legacy entered this period of real neglect. Critics found his work too baroque and imaginative.
And that neglect led to an irreparable loss during the Spanish Civil War.
It did. In 1936, his workshop in the Sagrada Familia was ransacked. His documents, his plans, and worst of all, his precious plaster-scale models were destroyed.
The blueprints for his genius.
Exactly. Future architects had to essentially reverse-engineer his methods from the broken fragments.
Thankfully, by the 1950s, his reputation started to recover, championed by people who saw the genius under the surface.
Major figures like the surrealist painter Salvador Dali and the modernist architect Joseph Louis Sert. They understood he was building with a logic that was far ahead of its time.
This led to the institutionalization of his work, right? The Gaudí chair at the university, the MoMA retrospective in New York.
And the Gaudí effect spread globally. Masters like Le Corbusier, Oscar Niemeyer, Santiago Calatrava, they all acknowledged his influence. Preciado explicitly used his principles for the Munich Olympic Stadium roof in 1972.
And finally, that recognition was cemented by UNESCO.
Yes. 7 of his works became World Heritage Sites between 1984 and 2005. And the UNESCO citation is key. It praises his exceptional creative contribution and how he anticipated and influenced modern construction in the 20th century.
The ultimate proof that the man once called a fool was, in fact, a genius.
And in a final, fitting twist, his deeply religious life has now put him on the path to sainthood. The cause for his canonization was opened in 2003.
And there's been a very recent, very significant update on that.
In April 2025, Pope Francis declared Gaudí venerable. That's a critical step, a formal recognition of his heroic virtue. It confirms the Church sees his life as exemplary.
It's a remarkable legacy, the creator of some of the world's most unique architecture, now on his way to sainthood.
His legacy is just woven into the identity of Catalonia and global art. The Gaudí Film Awards, World Art Nouveau Day on the anniversary of his death. He's everywhere.
So when we look back, we see this life that sits at the perfect intersection of faith, structural mathematics, and a profound reverence for nature. He was a visionary who literally refused to be bound by the straight lines of the industrial age.
And his greatest challenge was to perfect a style, the Gothic, that he saw as imperfect. He succeeded by abandoning human convention for nature's perfect logic. And it leaves us with a question, right? What does it mean for our modern, hyper-calculated world that the most innovative structures of the early 20th century were modeled not on computers, but on strings, weights, and the physics of a hanging chain?
His genius was in observation, not invention.
Exactly. Are the most elegant solutions found not in digital innovation, but in just radical, humble observation of the world around us? Something for you to mull over the next time you look at a tree branch.